Hey everybody, I have been joined by Richard from Too Fat Lardies to talk about his new book for Chain of Command, which is Blitzkrieg 1940.
It
We're
is.
also going to be catching up with Richard since the last time we've seen him, whenever he brought along What a Tanker, to see what the guys at Too Fat Lardies have been up to. So, Richard, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, as always. Blitzkrieg 1940, what have you created for us?
Oh, well, it's the first of the new handbooks that we're going to be running out for Chain of Command, which has just really given us an opportunity to go into a lot more detail. You know, it's great having a set of rules that covers the whole of the Second War, but there are huge changes in the way units were organised, the way troops fought between 1939 and 45. So creating the handbooks allows us to go into a lot more detail, to provide a lot more lists and a lot more support for people playing the different periods.
I see. So basically, people can get a lot more granular with the forces that they're playing.
Absolutely
with.
right.
That sounds good.
Absolutely
to me.
right.
Now, you were talking to me about some of the way the Germans were actually lined up in 1940. You were saying there was different waves of the armies.
Yeah, it's interesting.
It's
actually,
I'm curious about, so I'm going to dig into it a little.
we always have this image as wargamers as the Germans being this super uber army, and everybody focuses on just how great they are. But in 1940, it was kind of a case that they weren't really ready to go. In 1939, not everybody had been equipped properly, and so what the Germans did is they. At the end of the First World War, they'd been limited to an army of just 100,000 men, which is really kind of tiny for those times. And they had to expand that and expand it again and expand it again. And what they created was a number of waves. So the first wave division would be really, really well equipped. They'd have all the toys, they'd have the mortars, they'd have all the equipment that they needed. The second wave, not quite so good, and by the time we get down to fourth and fifth wave, they're actually getting the old First World War stuff out of the wardrobe and using that, because they just haven't built all the right amount of kit to equip all those divisions, and also they haven't really had a chance to get them all completely trained. So it's interesting when you see the newsreel footages of the tanks and the armoured personnel carriers storming through France. In fact, this is very much a propaganda victory for the Germans. You know, the vast majority of the Hanomag Classic 251 half-track hadn't even been armoured at that point in time and were only really used for towing guns. But, of course, they make great film footage. So we have those images in our mind, which is, as I say, a great propaganda victory for them, because it was a case of going to war on a shoestring. You get organisations like the Waffen-SS, where they're equipping their troops with stuff they've captured in Poland, because they literally don't have the weapons to equip them. So it's great to be able to represent all those different units and do it in different ways. And it's quite nice to be able to get my sort of First World War heavy machine guns out and use them with the Second World War figures. It's nice to do a few head swaps and whatever. It's all good fun. Creates a totally funky and very, very different type of army. So we've got kind of all those options in there from right the way through first wave, almost down to the ninth wave, and then you're into fortress troops in their emplacements who've hardly got anything.
So rifle between four men?
Yeah, it's not quite that bad, but again, rifles that are pretty much all they're restricted to at that point. So you do get an opportunity to get a lot more granular. And it's also interesting to go into other units. So, for example, we've got the Belgians in there, we've got the Dutch in there, we've got the French in there, we've got the British in there. And it's great to have an opportunity to say, well, is that British unit a regular unit? Are they territorial troops who really were just doing their weekend camps and getting a bit of training in drill, who'd had no experience with modern weapons at all? And when they get shipped out to France, they spend most of the time digging trenches, which they then don't use because they march into Belgium. And it's great to be able to say, well, it's not just a generic British force, it's something a lot more specific. So you can decide whether they're territorials and how long they've been in France, how much training they've had, how much equipment they've had. And then there's the opportunity to mix and match. So it might be nice to have a force of British troops who are supported by, I don't know, a Belgium anti-tank gun or a couple of French tanks who've turned up, because in all the chaos of that very, very frantic period of warfare between May the 10th and the end of May, when the British were evacuating at Dunkirk, you had all sorts of units fighting together who shouldn't have been fighting together but were. So there's great opportunities to take a British list and select supports from those other nationalities to get a great variety on the table. It's just, who can't like those French tanks with those really nice camouflage patterns? Good fun to have.
Well, I do have a question, and it actually stems from a misconception that I recently learned about, and I noticed I myself had fallen into, was that when you think of World War II, you think of the main players. You're thinking Britain, you're thinking America, you're thinking Germany, you're thinking Russia. But what about all of the smaller nations? Because I hear you mention the Belgians, the Dutch. Having a chance to actually play with those forces and explore the history of them is something that interests me a lot, to actually find out just how they fought and what they would have been equipped with.
Yeah. I totally agree, actually. It was really interesting doing the research for this, that we've got about 7 or 8 different Belgian lists in here, similar for the Dutch. I mean, rather than me sort of make it up, I mean, I can just flick through this. And, for the Belgians, for example, we've got a standard infantry platoon. We've got a reserve infantry platoon. Now, these guys are wheeling out some machine guns from the 19th century, the type of thing that, almost that, you'd have been using in the Zulu Wars type of thing. So that, but interesting little force. We've got an infantry scout platoon. We've got the Chasseurs Ardennais, who were off in the Ardennes trying to delay the Germans as they advanced. We've got the frontier cyclists. These were frontier cyclists. These were an elite Belgian unit on their bicycles. Really well played. They only recruited single men or divorced men because their death-defying antics on their bicycles were gonna be so so amazing that they couldn't have married men in there. The risk was far too high. So you've got these fabulous units with big floppy berets, and then you've got like motorized cavalry. You've got cavalry on motorcycles, and so whatever Belgian force you want to fight is pretty much in here. And the good thing is that each of these units have got their own support lists, what would be pertinent for them at that particular time. So these frontier cyclists, for example, get one of the prototype anti-tank guns on a little carrier base, which was so unstable that when they fired it, it would fall over. So the only way they could use this was by digging it in, so the earth was all around it to create a stable platform, which isn't ideal if you want to move it 100 yards to get a better view. But there's some really interesting, but they're not stuck with using...
Were they towing it on the bike?
Yeah, I've no idea if they were towing it with the bike. No, it was actually self-propelled on tracks, but the gun that's on top was a bit too heavy for the base. So there's some really interesting units, but if you've got a frontier cyclist force, you don't have to select that. You can go to you could go, for example, to the cavalry support list and choose some of the tanks. So there is a system that allows you to really mix and match. Or, as I say, you could decide you wanted a French tank or a British tank to support your Belgians because historically they fought alongside each other.
And let's be honest, war is chaos sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. It's a bit like here.
Thank you. Welcome to Ireland.
My pleasure. So obviously what we do then is, it's not just a big book of lists. We've got all the support options in there. We've got things like the national characteristics, which every nation has got them. They're there to reflect the way that they were trained. And the way they behaved in reality. So the Germans, as we remember from last time we played Chain of Command, have got that machine gun bonus and they've also got the hand grenade and stormtrooper attack, which they learned from their fathers. So each nation has got its own specific national characteristics. It explains all the support options, and then you've got their own armaments table as well. But more than that, we've also got a load of new rules in there for all sorts of things that happened in 1940. Obviously, when you write a set of rules, you are dealing with what's normal. So you're dealing with firing and movement and all the kind of usual things. But when you get into more detail in a handbook like this, it gives you an opportunity to look at things that are more period specific, because that campaign is really quite unique. You wouldn't apply some of the things that were happening there to 1944. So we've got unreliable allies, what we were talking about a minute ago, where if you are selecting a British tank to support your French unit, they're not unreliable because they're rubbish. They're just unreliable because they happen to turn up there in the chaos. And at some point in the game, they might get a radio message saying, actually, headquarters has shifted. We're 15 miles down the road. Come and join us. But, of course, selecting an unreliable ally is quite cheap. So there are times when they're going to stay all game, and there are times when they're not going to stay all game. So
it's a little risk reward.
Yeah, that's right. A risk reward, exactly. So we've also got other things in here, such as bicycle mounted troops, which you're clearly getting excited about.
I'm curious to see how this looks in miniature.
Horse-mounted troops, motorcycle-mounted troops. We've got assault boats and rafts. You've got lots and lots of rivers in Holland and Belgium, and the Germans like to get in their inflatable boats and paddle across.
I see.
So you've got to allow for that, and there's some great modelling opportunities in there as well.
Yep.
Not as in sort of knitwear modelling, but, you know...
what, I can't look fashionable? I'm sorry.
Well, you might carry it off, mate. I don't think I would somehow. So we've got assault boats and rafts in there. Then we've got things like airborne operations. Exciting stuff. It's great, isn't it? One of the fun things is when you look at A Bridge Too Far and the British at Arnhem, where they're putting in their carpet of paratroops that the tanks are meant to drive over, and everybody goes, wow, that's an audacious idea. Well, it was, but the Germans did it in 1940 in Holland. They did it the other way around, and they were very, very successful at dropping their paratroopers onto some key bridges, and then the Panzer divisions zoomed through to link up with them. So you've got to have rules in there for parachute landings, and of course you have the glider landings in Belgium, places like Eben-Emael, where they landed right on top of this great big fort and then rather surprised everybody. So we've got rules in there for glider landings.
Do you have rules for the Gigant?
For the what?
Gigant.
No.
Sad panda.
Yeah. So we've also got combat engineering, talking of which, so fortifications. So like the Maginot Line and like the, the Belgian forts, because the Belgians were reliant a lot, like most people were at that time. I mean, Hitler was building what we call the Siegfried Line, the West Wall in Germany. Most countries in Europe were reliant on big fortified lines. So we're taking into account the fortifications, we're taking into account demolition, because a lot of British and French and Belgian troops were attempting to delay the Germans by blowing up bridges, blowing up culverts, and stopping them advancing on the main defensive line. So all of that is in there. So we've been able to introduce a whole raft of new rules, which actually, in some cases, you could lift out and apply in other areas. So, for example, the paratroop and glider landing rules, you could apply at Arnhem because parachute's a parachute and glider's a glider. So you can do that. But it has allowed us to go into that much more details, which you can't put in the main rule book. Otherwise, you'd have a book about 500 pages long.
Yeah, and I'm guessing this is more of rules integration than taking over from it.
Yeah.
It's one thing you guys do very well with your rule set. You always keep everything nice and clean for everyone to play with. There's nothing saying you need to check book 5 in a series of 6 to supersede a rule in the main rule book.
No.
I like the fact that you guys don't do that.
Yeah. Well, it's I think it's important to be able to keep things as neat and tidy as possible. I mean, Chain of Command has been out for 5 years. It's hugely popular. And there are one or two areas where, if I'm honest, that I would say, okay, don't quite do it like that, do it like this, which I think happens with anything that's 5 years old, but that's very, very few and far between, and certainly none of the core mechanisms are affected in that way. Because
it's one thing I always say, as soon as a rule system hits market, that's you've had your beta test before, but that's the real test.
It is,
whenever you have thousands and thousands of people playing the game and actually seeing where are those little loopholes, where are the little things where what you've maybe written down and intending it a certain way doesn't translate.
No, well, the English language is an imperfect language,
Of course.
which is why, if you're wanting to write a scientific paper, you should really do it in German because their language is a lot more precise than ours. So you do get a situation where something is perfectly clear to you and perfectly clear to 101 other people, but 5 people might read it as being the opposite.
Yep.
So you're always going to get that, and as a rule lawyer, you have to be aware that that's potentially going to happen. But we try and keep it as clear as possible, and certainly the
You've done a
core
good
mechanisms are pretty simple, but not simplistic, obviously.
Of course.
Yeah, so a whole raft of lists. There's about 60 different armies you can choose in here.
Wow.
With about, it's either 5 or 4 more or 5 or 4 less. So let's say 60 other different support lists. So the choice in terms of creating a force that you want to game with is huge. And the nice thing is, to be honest with you, if you've got a Dutch force, that could be infantry, or it could be cavalry, or it could be motorcycle. The only thing that's really different is a little bit of coloured band around the wrists on their jacket. But I wouldn't worry too much about that. So if you buy a Dutch army, you can feel that as almost any one of those armies on that list. If you buy a German army, we talked about there being like 9 waves, and then the support troops. If you create a first wave German division force, which is a platoon of 4 squads, 50mm mortar, you can then just drop a second wave, for example, is 3 squads with no 50mm mortar. Well, you can use the same figures for that. And if you want to change it whereby you're using some of the First World War kit, just buy a couple of figures with a bit of First World War kit, and you've completely changed it. One of the weapons that they use is the MG15, which actually looks, if you just look at the barrel, is almost identical to an MG34. It's the bits down here where the guy's holding it that you can't see that are different. So in many ways, you don't even need to change your figures. But I quite like having some really weird and slightly different figures on the table.
You see, I know some people love miniatures to be precisely exact whenever they're playing World War II. It depends on who your opponent is. If you're both okay with fudging the look just a smidge, so you can play the game and play with that rule set, I see no problem with it.
No, I totally agree. I totally agree with you. I mean, I like making funny little figures. I mean, I happen to have a First World War machine gun team, and I just cut the First World War German heads off and put some of the Warlord plastic heads on.
That's clever.
Absolutely, the Warlord plastic stuff is fabulous for doing little conversions. But does the German helmet look that much different? Not really. If you don't look too carefully at it, you could use those First World War figures without any change, or just use your MG34 and say, well, it's the earlier model. But there's a great opportunity for huge variety in there without actually having to buy a vast number of different figures. That said, there are some great figures out there. Certainly, there's no shortage of stuff for the French and the British, which is really good. Warlord produced some really nice stuff. You go to companies like Crusader, really super French motorcycle troops that I'm absolutely in love with, and companies like May 40 Miniatures in Holland, who do their own range of Dutch. So all the figures are out there. It's just an opportunity to paint up an army and use it for all different types of troops. There's, as I say, 60 lists in there, which gives you a great amount of choice, and 5 new, exciting, and very 1940-esque scenarios as well.
I was about to ask if you had scenarios in there.
Yeah, when we wrote the main chain of command rules, we were very, very keen to create 6 scenarios which can almost cover any aspect of warfare. So the first game is a meeting of patrols in no man's land. The next scenario is an attack on the outpost line. The next one is an attack on the main defences. Then the next 2 are kind of breakthrough scenarios. And then the final 6th one is the attack on the ultimate objective. So those scenarios really work in any number of different environments. You could use them for any period. But the ones in here that we've done, actually, we've got 5 scenarios we've got Going with a Bang, which is a great fun one, where the Allied side are trying to do some demolitions to slow down the Germans. So this could be the Chasseurs Ardennais in Belgium, who are maybe blowing up a bridge or two to stop the German tanks getting through, or it could be British engineers or French engineers or Dutch engineers blowing up just little road culverts and things like that. Then we've got Strike from Above, which is all about airborne landings and how that works. Then we've got Swift to Support, which is about a smaller force trying to hold out while reinforcements are being sent. So that's a kind of breakthrough scenario, as is the Hasty Defence, which again is the Germans really pushing on with the Allies trying to get their defences together on the hoof. And then we've got Blitzkrieg, which is the final one, which kind of, as the name suggests, is a case of really trying to steamroller, punch through. Yeah. So 5 really good scenarios, and every one of them could be used anywhere in France or the Low Countries in 1940. But what we've said is this scenario would be great for this type of situation. So we've got some guidelines in there for when people might want to use those ones. But all in all, it's kind of a really one-stop shop for France and the Low Countries, and we got Italy as well. Italy are in there because they invaded southern France in the very final days of the campaign, because Mussolini said to his generals, I want you to get me 30,000 men killed so I can get to the peace conference. And so they decided to attack through the Alps, and they kind of got frostbite and went home and had a really bad time of it. But we put them in there for completeness sake, but I think you would probably have to be a lunatic to want to refight that particular part of the war.
Yes, which army I'm going to pick up.
Even I'm not tempted to get an Italian army to have frostbite in a mountain pass in the Alps, whereas all the other ones I'm building forces for, and but that's just me.
Well, the big question is, you guys love exploring World War II. This is for 1940. Are we going to see you moving on through the different years of the war for other books like this?
Yeah, we are. Yeah, we're going to. This is just the first of them. We're working at the moment with a gentleman from the Jungle Warfare school in at the Australian Army. At the moment, we're working on a Far East one to go with this. So we're going to be. We're not just going to be covering the obvious stuff. We're going to be covering China as well. So we've got Burma, we've got Singapore, we've got the island hopping with the U.S. Marines. We've got the whole of the Far East that we're going to be covering there. Obviously, the Australians fighting their own battles there against the Japanese.
The Japanese almost made it to Australia.
Yeah, they did.
Which a lot of people don't really realise, because you never hear about the Japanese campaign.
No, exactly. And it's when the gentleman who's the commanding officer of the Jungle Warfare School down there said, he was really interested in working with us on it, and he's done an awful lot of research on the period, and obviously with his own particular expertise in jungle warfare, he's kind of the man that we want to be working with. So that's going to be the next one. We're going to be rolling out others. The majority of them are going to be in hard copy like this. There are going to be some where we're just going to be releasing it in PDF. Now, for example, the campaign in Denmark and the campaign in Norway in 1940 are really interesting, but they're not real headline grabbing things. But we are going to be covering those and producing them in a PDF format. But the majority is going to be in this. We're going to go for, as I say, the Far East. Then the next one is going to be Blitzkrieg in the East, which is going to be covering 1941 all the way through to Stalingrad. Yeah. And then we're going to be rolling that out. So we're obviously going to be moving then through into mid-war, late war, other stuff as well. But the whole of the war is going to be covered in a lot of detail. It's I think as war gamers, we all love lists, and we love looking through them and thinking, oh, if I get another 3 figures, I've got a whole new army for the cost of like £5. And it's nice to be able to, just jiggle things a little bit and get totally different units, because these guys fight in such different ways. Some of them are very First World War in their mentality, whereas others are a lot more into fire and movement, and a lot more modern, and the equipment the capabilities sometimes don't quite marry up.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have troops with really good kit who don't really know how to use it, but you can equally get really good troops who don't necessarily have the right kit.
They have a rock and a stick.
Yeah, and the technology is such that the tanks aren't these sort of lumbering giants that everybody is scared to death of, because they're a little bit more like a dustbin on wheels. Yeah.
Well,
and that's fun.
It's something myself and John here in the office talk about all the time, is the early tank tactics and the actual schools of thoughts that were used for tank warfare at the beginning of World War II. There was so much catching up to.
Oh, absolutely.
The Germans picked up really goddamn quickly, getting Blitzkrieg underway. But they weren't really the first ones to do it, because you also had the Soviet concept of deep battle, which was essentially the same thing. If I remember correctly. I could be talking at my back end here.
No, deep battle is pretty much a similar thing. But it's intriguing in the rules when you look at the French, and everybody goes, wow, the French had fabulous tanks and they were really well armoured and they were really good. How did they lose? And then you think, actually, the tank commander is in his one-man turret. Yep. He's commanding the tank. He's loading the gun, he's aiming the gun, he's firing the gun.
Yep.
And when you look at the Germans with their multi-man turrets, so their tank commander is just commanding the tank, how much more nimble, how much more effective are they? And it's really important, I think, if you're going to represent that period, not just to focus on the armour thickness and the penetration capability of the gun, but to understand the way they fought. And then you really can see why, whilst the French had technically on paper very good tanks, why they weren't as good as they thought. And funnily enough, some of the designs that they abandoned and didn't use with multiple manned turrets turned out to be some of the best tanks of the war, because the ones they had in storage, and they only bought them out late in the day after Dunkirk. And then they're going, oh, actually, these are quite good. Why didn't we make more of them instead of those rubbish ones over there? So it's really interesting to examine and explore that by playing games with slightly different forces.
The one I'm really curious to explore whenever the supplement comes out for it is going to be the early war Russians. Seeing that initial idea of one man carries the rifle. When that man dies, the man without a rifle picks it up. I'm super curious to see how you guys are going to model that inside the game. Not to mention the horde with the deployment tactics that you actually use in chain of command.
It's really interesting, because the one thing that the Soviets are really good at is reinventing themselves. They are not hidebound by tradition. So they don't say, I say, old chap, we've always done it that way, so we're always going to do it that way. They say, well, that ain't working. What can we do to improve it? And they are much more... they're much less self-conscious about the way they do it. They go, right, let's change it, let's do it. When they invaded Finland in 1939, they were spanked rotten for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then they said, stop the war for a month while we retrain and develop new tactics. And they did. And they came back and they effectively won that. So that's something that that most armies aren't capable of doing.
The big problem with most armies trying to do that is whenever you're making those changes, you are risking lives. If you're willing to expend those lives to change your tactics, you can have what the Russians had, which was that very quick and adaptive.
That's the great advantage of communism, isn't it? When you're not worried about people's lives.
Harsh one, but it kind of works.
Judgmental, but no. Well, I mean, Stalin wasn't really known as being a sort of.
He had the purges.
Yeah, he did, and he certainly had the same attitude as Napoleon, what do a million lives matter compared to me? And he was prepared to, risk those different ideas and concepts to see if they worked by using human beings as, laboratory rats. But it's an interesting dynamic there, which probably needs addressing in the handbook when we cover it.
I'm very curious to see how you actually model it, because the Soviets, you're going to have big units trying to come out of your deployment zones. And actually, the way you figure out your deployment zones, I have to wonder, do you maybe give the Soviets an extra one just because they're going to have so many men, things like that?
Yeah, possibly. It's what's good is that we're starting to see a lot more books written in the Russian language now being translated into English, because we've always, in this country, tended to have a very German-centric view of the war in the East, the Eastern Front, because nobody reads Russian, and the Russians during the Cold War were not, sending books over here to be reviewed, or if they were written in a very, very propaganda type fashion to show how great the workers and peasants had it. Now we're seeing certainly more honest appraisals. I wouldn't say that all that element of propaganda's gone, because the Russians are very, very proud people as a nation, and they're inclined to look for heroism where it was there. So, but we are seeing more books. In fact, I've actually just ordered a load in anticipation of doing the research, and it's been great to get a much greater selection of Russian authored books, and I think that is going to allow us to produce stuff that is a lot more representative of the reality of war in the Eastern Front, because you get so many books which are really written from a very, very almost pro-Nazi point of view in some respects, and you think, well, that ain't good history.
Well, it's what you always see. Whichever source you're working from is always biased toward whoever's writing it.
Yeah, of course.
So getting views from multiple sources from each of the countries to write them from their own perspective. Even that, you're still having to balance what they're saying, because
you are. If you're writing a book about your experiences, you're never going to say I was a complete idiot and got everything wrong, are you?
Well. I think I've made 1 or 2 admissions on video.
Well, there we are. But so it's it's important to do the research. I mean, this took me 9 months research, and
that's part of the fun of it.
It is. I enjoy it. It's interesting because I can read a bit of Dutch and I can speak a bit of French and German. How I'm going to get around fortunately, I've got the guy who speaks a bit of Japanese. How I'm going to deal with the Cyrillic alphabet is going to be an interesting challenge. But you
just need a little decoder ring.
Yeah, well, that's right. But but it's all good. That's part of the fun. That's certainly part of the enjoyment I get, and it's great when you get the game on the table and you go, "Ooh, wow, that really feels like 1940."
Well, there's a question for everybody at home then. Which era of the war are you most looking forward to seeing the guys at Too Fat Lardies tackle? I want to hear below what it is.
So do I.
All right, so aside from doing all the fabulous work on this, what else have you guys been up to? Because last time you were here, you had What a Tanker. How did that go down with everybody?
Oh, my Lord, that's been fabulous. The reception has been great, and what we really, really enjoyed seeing about that is people running the games at war game shows and conventions, and youngsters getting involved and playing the game. I have had so many emails from people saying, I've got my wife playing wargaming for the first time ever, and you think, yes, that's great. And my daughter and her boyfriend are coming round, and I'm introducing them to What a Tanker. Nice. I don't think people would do that with Chain of Command. Much as I love Chain of Command,
it's a little heavy.
It's not a game that you would use to introduce your mother-in-law to wargaming, whereas What a Tanker probably is.
Well, you see, it's one of those things. I've actually considered trying to get my family into gaming, into like board gaming, wargaming, things like that. And What a Tanker, it does make sense, because all they have to think of is, I have one tank. I am controlling one tank. Yeah. The level of abstraction is low enough. It's low enough hurdle for them to step over quite happily without going, what do you mean I've got half an army moving across the tabletop? How do I make him shoot? How do I make him move?
Yeah. No, that's right. And funnily enough, they can then go, oh, I could buy a tank and paint it myself. It's green. and to get somebody into the hobby, you want to set the entry threshold as low as possible, really. And that is a fabulously low threshold. One plastic tank.
One plastic kit, build it, paint it, go.
That's right. So that's
kind of why John's missus has a Pink Panther.
Right.
It's actually pink.
Wow.
Note of me going, yeah.
I know a song about that. So we've really been busy with that. We had a really hectic year with shows, and we've been doing an awful lot of games days around the country, from Edinburgh to Exeter and all points in between, which has really, really kept us busy. We had a fabulous salute where we were running 2 games there. Water Tanker and our sister company Riser Express were doing a big Napoleonic game with the author Dave Brown. And I was over in Historicon in the States in the summer, which was fabulous. The Lard America group over there, the guys who... Lard America. I've even got a Lard America shirt. That's right.
Okay.
Make lard great again. That's what I say. Something like that. My hands are too big. Right. But yeah, the guys out there who are coordinating, shall we say, the Lardy representation at the HMGS shows, because the Historical Miniatures Gaming Society, I think, run the real big shows over there. So you've got Cold Wars, you've got Fall In, and you've got Historicon. And the Lard America team are putting everything together. So we had about 20-odd games, official games on the program. In the main hall there, with lots of nice signage and everything. So we had loads of games on there, which was great to get over there and support them and meet all the US lardies out there, have a few beers with them, and then have a few more beers with them. And then a few more beers with them.
You see this like it's a problem.
Yeah, well, it was quite funny, actually. We were in a bar, and they came out with the tabs for everybody, and they go, right, 2 beers, and that's me, and 3 beers there. And the girl goes, and I've got 2 here with 11 lagers. They went, that's the Brits. Yeah, okay, fine. So, yeah, no, great time, absolutely great time out there. The American conventions are totally different to historical wargame shows, and they're more like a convention like Spiel or something
they're a bit
that.
more flash.
They're 4 days long, so much more intensive, and all bells and whistles and constant gaming. But the good thing is, I always think, well, a whole day of gaming is a bit like having a bottle of wine. Just 2 days of gaming is a bit like having two bottles of wine. It's better. Yeah. But then you get to point 3. Do you really want 3 or 4 bottles of wine? The wheels are starting... I know some
folks who wouldn't say no.
The wheels are starting to come off for me at that point. But the good thing about a US convention is you don't feel obliged to be there all the time. You don't feel obliged to be gaming all the time. There's painting workshops, airbrush workshops. I picked up some tips from a guy there, because I'm about as, I might as well use a hammer as use an airbrush when I'm painting my figures. It just doesn't work for me. So the guy there gave me a few tips, which was really great. And they've got, obviously, the sales area, and they also have like a big lecture thing where people are talking about whatever they're talking about. I think they call it the academy or the university, whatever.
The only reason I think I miss Historicon most years is because I've done Gen Con just before.
Oh, yeah.
Because one comes off the back of the other pretty damn quickly.
Yeah, no, it does. So they're good, and you can dip in and dip out when you want. So that was kind of the big event of the year. I keep promising to go down to CanCon in Australia, but
that's a long
walk.
Australia.
It's a long walk.
Yeah.
It was far enough going to America, but
let's not forget Australian customs.
Yeah.
What's all this metal you're bringing into my country?
All right. Yeah,
is this safe for my environment?
But yeah, so that was good, and we've just come back from, where the hell was it? Belgium and Holland. We went over for Crisis, which is my favourite show of the year. One of the reasons is it's kind of the last show of the year, so it's kind of signing off at the end of a hard year, which is great. And we went out there, picked up a trophy for the best participation game, which was brilliant. But we also had a chance to do Arnhem. So we did a bit of a battlefield tour. Nice. We started at the bottom where 30 Corps started, and we worked our way up through Eindhoven and Nijmegen and on to Arnhem. And one of the things we're going to be looking at for Chain of Command is doing a supplement, not a handbook, but a supplement, because it's just specifically focusing on that. Even tighter than this is just that one sort of market garden operation. And we're going to be producing that in next year, early part of next year. And that's going to allow us to focus even more, go into even more detail. And actually, we did a road trip oddcast. Part of we do an irregular podcast, which we call the Oddcast, because it comes out at odd times. Yeah. It's good, isn't it?
I see what you did there.
Our marketing department worked hard on that. And you can listen to that and hear about our road trip to Arnhem, which is possibly of interest.
Yeah, it could be a lot.
In amongst discussing beer and things like that.
It's one thing I find historical gamers love hearing other historical gamers chat about their thoughts, their ideas about the tactics, the history and stuff.
Yeah.
And then it gives them a reason to argue on the internet.
Oh, it does, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm quite happy for people to say, Clark, you got it wrong again. So it's good to be able to combine. It's been a busy year, but it's good to be able to combine that opportunity for historical research along with going to all the different gaming events we go to. And we're kind of now at the stage of the year where we're on a bit of a wind down, and I'm thinking about what we're going to be doing next year. We start our first show at Penarth, just outside Cardiff, at the end of January. And the next day, we're at Bristol Independent Gamers for a big sharp practice weekend they're holding there, which is going to be great. This is the second one. They ran it last year to start with, and they've had a number of events there, but this is the second year in a row for this one. So it's going to be busy times, and lots on the agenda, lots of new stuff we're thinking about. Looking at a set of ancient sharp practice-y type rules. I quite like the idea of, a little 50 or 60 Romans escorting the pay chest through the forests and the hairy Germans jumping out, or even Germans who aren't hairy.
There's nothing wrong with that. You could also do a bit of Romano-British if you want.
Absolutely
with the Picts
right.
coming down from the north.
Yeah, absolutely right. Well, that's right. Always have a bit of Picty fun.
There's nothing wrong with a big angry Scotsman coming down with nothing but a bit of blue paint on him.
No, well, it often happens. But yeah, so lots of things we're thinking about, and lots of stuff in the pipeline with Chain of Command. So next year's looking to be as hectic as this year, if not more so.
Good problems to have.
Yeah, we get more and more of the Lardy Games days popping up, and they say, can you come along? And I say, yes. So we've had new ones this year in Yorkshire and Harrogate, and Exeter, I mentioned, was a new one, in Chelmsford. So all over the shop, really.
I see. I assume, all right, we're going to have to link in the show notes below the Lardy's home for their forums.
Yeah, you have it on the forum. There's a big section there. I think it's called the Ambassador's Reception, which talks about all the events we're going to with the Ferrero Rocher.
I see. All right, well, we'll have to get that linked in the show notes below. Richard, it's always a pleasure. I think we've covered everything you wanted, or is there anything we missed?
Oh, no, I think we've covered everything, haven't we, really?
Always a pleasure, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you for coming
to
in.
see you.
Everybody,
Thanks.
get those comments in below. Where do you want to see Chain of Command go for one of the supplements in World War II? What do you think of the idea of doing some sharp practice ancients? We'll move on. We will see you again very soon.